Okay, hey y'all. Welcome back to Raw Reflections, where I, Keaton Wyndham, reflect on the last week of class that I've experienced as a conservative Christian evangelical who is going through a liberal program in a more liberal state. So, I did not set my stuff up the way I wanted it. There we go. So sorry. Um, so last week was week 3, which was ethics, and much more exciting than I thought it would be. Whereas this week we covered anatomy, and it was every bit as exciting as I thought it would be. I was not shocked. Um, but I was like pleasantly surprised how much deeper like the content was than I was preparing for. I was expecting, just like a lot of external like anatomy labeling and I was expecting a lot more um, of the woke language, which we did really start to get into. Um, there like it got really wordy this week as I saw a lot of classmates and the professor using like those more liberal woke terms of like people with penises and people with vaginas. I, I myself did not engage with that. Um, I just kind of try to avoid like saying the masculine and feminine like descriptors. But so let's get into the format for the week. We're gonna cover a Q&A question. It was that time again for my group to record a question for the professor. Um, we can cover some readings that we did. Let's see, what else did I have? A discussion board, the current event journal, and then the assignment, which will be probably the quickest part, if you can believe that. So the Q&A video question that I asked my professor was a question that I was going to ask week 1, but if you saw my week 1 video, you saw that it was like the first week of class and the first day of class was right on the heels of President Trump um, doing an executive order about there only being 2 genders, and I was like, ooh, let me hurry up and be the first person to ask about that. That way I can impress my professor. Um, so I held on to this question, which comes up a lot for me in the work that I do as a therapist with students with autism and neurodivergence and disabilities. Um, I have frequently run across a statistic that says that 15 to 35% of people with autism, and that is the autism that doesn't also have the comorbidity or the co occurring disorder of an intellectual disability. So just autism without an intellectual disability. Because that is a whole different like subgroup of the autism community. So 15 to 35% of individuals with autism identify as being a member of the LGBT community, whereas the population as a whole in the US, only 7 to 8% identify as LGBT. So I was asking my professor, like, what she felt like personally as a professional who has kind of been in this sphere, like if what her thoughts on this differentiation in percentages was, and if there was any like literature to back this up, um, and just kind of like what her take on it was, because I know 15 to 35% is a huge range. However, let's say we only use 15%, and then let's say we lowball the US population percent as well to 7, that's still double the population by comparison. Um, and I should have been more specific. I guess my professor was thinking like I hadn't been like attempting to inform myself, because she gave like a whole spiel about correlation and causation. And I walk around preaching to people correlation does not equal causation all the time. However, working with teens and preteens, especially, I see a lot of my students really struggle with gender identity and sexuality. And I have a theory. It completely flies in the face of her theory, but I'm going to share it with you because I don't feel like the answer she gave me was rooted in any like statistics or data. She really just kind of gave her opinion on it as a professional. And so I'll give you my opinion as a mental health professional as well, because that's what she also is a mental health professional. Um, she said that she feels like people with autism are just so used to already kind of going against the norm, and they don't naturally always take what like the societal expectations into account, and they're not as easily like peer pressured, so they're more open-minded, and so they're like more open to exploring their sexualities. And like, I hear you. However, the kids that I have worked with that have kind of put flesh on this data for me, what I have seen is that they have um, an a presentation of autism that has less support need. So that's autism level 1, which is the lowest level. But so level 1 basically means that they can navigate the world around them fairly well. They just more often than not come off as like awkward or rude, but they don't need any like major supports. But those types of individuals, they recognize how different they are. They feel this level of otherness, but because they often don't understand their diagnosis as deeply as they should, they have these like gaps in their knowledge base about themselves. And so they are either consciously or subconsciously walking around thinking, why am I so different? Why am I not like everyone else? And the internet and social media and like the sensationalizing of being LGBTQ and all of this more woke stuff convinces them that it's not because of their autism, it's because of their sexual identity or their sexuality. And so I have had several students who have spoken to me specifically about this, not really asking questions, but just kind of like talking in general. And it has been so interesting to see this pattern develop, and it's really really scary that this is a pretty predominant pattern because the LGBT community is very accepting. There's this church in our town that's like very friendly, but like friendly in almost like a cultic kind of way. They like walk around in packs and stuff, and people kind of make jokes about them, and um, and that's kind of how I see what I jokingly refer to as like the alphabet mafia do with these neurodivergent teens and preteens, is that they go, oh, you're different. We have felt different too. Let me supply you with the answer. It's because you are othered in this way. Um, choose your letter. We can hang out. We will support you. We will rally behind you. We will be your allies. And like they instantly are given this whole community, and that kind of community and support is so much more readily available at their fingertips, and it's so much friendlier and exciting than any kind of autism community is for their age. And so, like, professionally, disagree with my professor on that. As someone who specializes in autism and who is seeing this, like, out and about in the world. So it's kind of a bust on the Q&A question this week. So for the I'll start with the assignment next, since that's the shortest. The assignment was to propose a topic for pardon me, what's happening with my voice? To propose a topic for my final project. And I think in week three's video, I talked about the three like options that I had to supply, and I didn't really go into detail because I ended up choosing ADHD and sex and like that connection. What I actually the title, the fun, like catchy title is ADHD in bed. But then my like more formal subtitle is the effects of ADHD on sexual encounters. Um, just because I personally have ADHD and um, I have like seen some of the symptoms, like as I've learned more and more about ADHD and neurodivergence for myself personally and for the students I work with, I have noticed that that kind of executive dysfunction and neurodivergence follows you everywhere. And so, I mean, why are we not talking about how it affects us in our bedrooms as married couples and adults and sexual beings when we literally talk about it, how it affects us everywhere else? So I am really excited for this project to kind of develop and for you guys to get to see it, because I will try to share it with y'all and maybe even give it its own video at the end, because I mean, well, I'm gonna let some people see it first, but I'm hoping that it's as good as I'm wanting it to be at the end. So the current event that I reviewed, sorry, looking at my notes. The current event that I went over this week, was about how the Department of Education has not approved a single county's sex education curriculum in the state of Florida. So, like, no county in the state of Florida has an approved sex education curriculum. And instead of just working from the old curriculum until they can get something approved, Florida has actually dug their heels in and has said, well, if you're not approving it, then like we don't like this old curriculum. That's why we're trying to get a new one approved. We're not just going to, in the meantime, teach this old curriculum that we don't like. So we'll just do nothing. The state of Florida, for the last, like a little over a year, has not taught any level or any variation of sex education in their schools, which is wild to me. And at first, like as a conservative, as a Republican, I was trying to think like, oh, yeah, maybe they didn't want to do any like gender identity, sexuality type stuff. But I mean, Florida's pretty conservative already. I highly doubt that was in their sex education curriculum to begin with. But so I found it in like the Florida Sentinel, or it was the Orlando Sentinel, I think, was the newspaper article. And it was like an op-ed from like a more liberal woman. And she was basically like shaking her finger at Florida for like letting this go on so long. And so I'm going to read a little bit specifically from my notes just because I want to make sure that y'all hear just how extreme this proposed curriculum is, because I was like, I'm a conservative girly, like I prefer that people choose abstinence until marriage just because that is the biblical directive. But I don't think we should leave people uneducated and kind of bully them into it. But here is what Florida has said. The curriculum has new directives that include abstinence only and anatomy, terminology, and contraception restrictions. And I was like, what the heck does that mean? The proposed curriculum, remember that the Department of Education will not approve in any county in Florida. The curriculum wants to focus on an abstinence-only approach and teach anatomy without using any pictures. I'm sorry. How do you teach anatomy without any pictures? Because I did not have sex with anyone other than my husband. You couldn't have taught me anatomy without pictures. Like, and even so, like, what about like a uterus and ovaries? Like, those are not inherently sexual. I don't understand. Terminology restrictions include using the word rape, discussing domestic violence, STDs and AIDS, the different types of sex like oral, anal, other kinds. Contraception will not be covered, even though the article shares that over 65% of women use various forms. The curriculum was unclear whether it would address the topic of consent as well. LGBT topics are also wholly excluded in this new sex education. And then the woman who wrote the op-ed ended it by making a plea to like the people of Florida to like campaign and advocate for like a more comprehensive curriculum. And so, like, I don't think LGBT issues should be taught in sex ed curriculum. I think that is like a moral issue that should be handled by parents. But things like contraceptives, like if 65% of women are using contraceptives, like there is nothing inherently evil with contraceptives. Like, I mean, unless you are Catholic or one of those other things that thinks that contraceptives are from the devil and we should have as many babies as we can. And teaching about STDs and AIDS, like I just saw something that said that people are less informed about STDs and AIDS now than they were like 10, 20 years ago, because the AIDS epidemic has completely like been separated from these young people by like generations. And so it's more of an abstract concept. But what really got me was that they don't want to use the word rape and they do not want to discuss domestic violence. And I'm sorry, but kids need to understand what constitutes rape, what constitutes consent. They need to know what a healthy relationship looks like, because if you know what a healthy relationship looks like, you know how to avoid an unhealthy relationship. And so domestic violence is also easily wrapped up into sex education. I I had a really hard time. I thought this kind of went too far in the conservative direction. Um, Although I did kind of ask the questions of like, what age group are they trying to like restrict this from? Because like, do I think my 7-year-old needs to know about rape and domestic violence and STDs and AIDS? No. Do I think he needs to see anatomical pictures and learn like anatomy just yet? Like his own, maybe. But like if they're using like medical, actual realistic photographs of anatomy, I could see how some parents would have a problem with that. Um, but I think that just enough details were left out of this kind of op-ed piece that I couldn't really definitively end on one side or the other. Um, and then for the discussion board, we talked about, well, what I chose to talk about was um, how after reviewing the anatomy slides, they were so much more detailed than we were ever shown like in school. Um, and I started as like a science or nursing major, but I halfway through, really more like 3/4 of the way through, sort of, um, I ended up switching to a journalism major. So by my degree, I have a background in journalism and agriculture. But when you look at my transcript, people are like, what the heck are all of these super like hardcore science classes about? And that's why. I wanted to wear scrubs every day to work. And so I chose nursing, which was dumb. um, so I really just reflected on like my thoughts and my feelings after kind of going through the material this week and like how that held up against my life experiences. And and I really talked about like how much of an injustice it was to have gone all the way through high school not having been taught the detailed anatomy that I myself have. And then when I went into college, because I wasn't like a biological sciences major from start to finish, I didn't get the opportunity to learn about that then either. So I'm a woman with, sorry, I looked up at all my degrees. Um, I'm a woman who has a master's and tons of postgraduate certifications and licensure. And I went to a major university to get my bachelor's. I am on my second whole master's degree, and I am just now seeing this detailed explanation of external male and female anatomy, because it's not something that I thought I ever needed to go look up. I thought, I've seen the literature, I've seen the diagrams, I'm good, like no questions. Um, but I was so shocked, and I even like pulled my husband over to the side when I was looking at it on my computer, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, did you know about this? Like, did you know about the Skene's gland, and did you know the Hart's line and the Bartholin's gland? Um, and he was like, yeah, yeah. He hung out in the science majors way longer than I did and did all the health science tech. Um, and so he was more exposed to it than I was, but he was like, that's really weird. Like, as much as knowledgeable as you are about sex, and like as much as you have researched it and studied it and really tried to like garner this knowledge, it struck him as so odd that I didn't know that, because it felt so elementary compared to the other kinds of information that I have and can like very easily recall. So that, like, it made me so frustrated and like embarrassed to think about this huge, like, fundamental gap that I'd had in my knowledge. And it kind of just irritated me that, like, no matter where I went for school, like, nobody thought that that should be a priority. And so, but I learned it now. And, right place, right time. It all worked out, I guess. So now let's talk about the, let's see, we've done the assignment, we've done the current event, we've done the discussion board. Oh, my favorite readings. Well, because we were talking about anatomy, and I've explained to you guys before that, like, there are 10 to 20 readings a week. It was getting a little woke. No one is surprised. And so we were talking about, come on, brain, we can do it. The ADHD is ADHDing today, friends. They were talking a lot about transgender issues this week. I don't know. Well, I mean, I guess, they'll make loose connections where they want. They were tying in, anatomy not being equal to gender identity and blah, 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 whatever. I avoided those articles because although I can, come into contact with those types of things and still come out, I feel, relatively unscathed. I'm not going to jump into the line of fire. I'm not interested in learning about that. I don't feel like it's appropriate for what I'm trying to do with my degree. So, no gracias. We recovered the clitoral anatomy, which I think I talked about like in week 1 or week 2. But I drew a picture this time, y'all, and it is super rudimentary. Don't even judge. But remember, it's like a wishbone. It was really just kind of a refresher of like, hey, the clitoris is not just what you see on the outside. It's like a whole, like, wishbone shape. Like, this green circled portion is what you see on the outside. And then these two, like, wishbone, like, arms are actually coming down around the vaginal canal. And these two little kind of extra, like, pieces of tissue, when a woman is aroused, they actually constrict the vaginal canal. And when people are talking about this, like, magical unicorn, hard to find G spot, it's not actually the G spot. It's actually this little, like, reddish purple circle that I made. It's actually that spot, the, like, sort of back of the clitoris, internally is being stimulated. And it's just all the clitoris. It's all the clitoris. It's just, is it being stimulated externally or internally? And so I always think that's a fun little refresher. I read an article about the hymen and virginity and, like, how other cultures put such importance on that. And I knew that already, but there are 8 different presentations that a hymen can have. It can have missing pieces or holes or different, like, positionings. And scary enough, in a study that was done, only like 64% of chief resident pediatricians were able to accurately identify a hymen and, like, whether or not it was intact in a child, or in a young lady. Um, and you would think, oh, 64%, not bad. But in these other cultures that value virginity and the hymen, like women's lives are at stake. And so the fact that they are getting it wrong almost half of the time, and that's the chief resident. That's not that's not, you know, the the run of the mill residents that are doing all this work, and there's like one resident for a whole pack of residents. So they tested the highest one and they came out almost 1 and 2. But so I had some classmates who were actually from kind of the Middle East area who really like did a good job of like highlighting what this looks like and the consequences of if they get it wrong, and you know how we need to, we, you know, being them, the Middle East, we need to quit putting such an emphasis on virginity and the hymen, and I thought it was so great, and it was so heartbreaking also to hear what they were talking about. Um, the an interesting one that I read this week was about the male RAI, which, in case you don't know what RAI means, I fully do not expect you to. Male RAI standing for receptive anal intercourse, or I'm sorry, receptive anal insertion is also what the I can stand for. The Journal of Sexual Medicine in 2023 put out a whole article on a study that they did, because they they were trying to kind of figure out what caused pain and what caused pleasure, because everyone has heard the concept of like the prostate being the male equivalent of the G-spot. And so they really kind of just did a full deep dive into, I think they had 30 participants. Let's see. I probably butchered that. Let's see. Yeah, 30. Look at me. And 90 of them identified as cisgender males. So, they were born men, they identify as men. Most of them were heterosexual. And so they talked about their motivations for receptive anal intercourse. And the top 3 reasons why this group of men said that they might engage in it is to, number 1, derive intrinsic pleasure. Number 2, provide both pleasure for a partner and a way to improve intimacy and connection. And 3, this one I would have never come up with. This is what made it so interesting for me. Number 3 was an inability to be the insertive partner due to physical or mental challenges. And that was so interesting, because I'd never considered that. I just thought, oh, well, then I guess they don't have penetrative sex. I guess they just do other sexual acts. Like, it would have never occurred to me before, that there would be a different kind of option. So let's see. And they said, this group of doctors also said that overall, they found that 2 major areas of erogenous sensation occur along the anterior rectal wall and within the anus. There were also 2 distinct categories of pain that emerged. Pain with insertion and pain at other times. That felt a little bit self-explanatory. When they say the anterior wall, so when you're looking at a person, like, and they are trying to like describe things medically, posterior is like the back side of a person, and anterior is like the front side of a person. So, and this is going to be a super non-medical example, so bear with me. So if I said the posterior side of my shoulder, I'm talking about like the back of my shoulder. If I'm saying the anterior side of my shoulder, I mean the part of my shoulder that is like more forward facing. I also remember posterior because I did take anatomy and physiology in undergrad. And I remember them talking about like posterior being like posterior, like the butt. And so that just always helped me remember like it's more likely the back. Um, and yes, there are all kinds of like directional medical words, and I'm not going to get into them because there's like medial, distal, dorsal, we're not doing it. Not a doctor. Remember, dropped the nursing. Um, but so what I try to explain to people, because more commonly I get a question about like, how do you find a G spot? What do you like? How do you stimulate the male or female G spot? And so I normally say, it's pointing towards the belly button. So the anterior wall is the side of the wall that is like closer to the belly button, which I'm sorry, but if you look at what the anterior wall of a rectum is, on a man, it's a prostate. Sorry. Um, but I think they really just wanted to point out that, like a G spot, it's not located in the exact same spot because people are different. Duh. um, but also, pardon. But also, the two categories of pain, like, miss me with that. Insertion hurts. I'm sure it does, friend. Um, and what in the heavenly days does pain at other times mean? Because that is a direct quote. Pain at other times. Insertion, pain at other times. That was too vague. But I did think it was really interesting, like how this article was like trying to push like breaking the stigma for like male receptive anal insertion. Um, I have thoughts on that, just totally aside from that article. I could do a whole video on that, and I probably will one day. This is probably a good reminder for me to like jot that down, that I need to rant about it. But I'm not gonna do that now because your girl's trying to keep it mildly short form. I will share the link for the super cool color coded anatomy chart that our professor shared with us, and I will share the link to the current event journal. That is it. Finally, after all of this stumbling and bumbling, if you guys liked the video, question, comment, or concern, let me know. Until then, I will see you next time. Bye.